The gavel fell with a sharp, definitive crack that echoed the brittle emptiness of the grand ballroom. Arthur Penhaligon didn't flinch. He never did. He'd just spent $80,000 on a dead woman's forgotten possessions, a collection of dusty hat boxes and tarnished silver vanities catalogued as Lot 7B, a ladies' miscellany, C. 1990s. He cared for none of it. The purchase was a reflexive act of charity, a tax-deductible display of the detached philanthropy expected of a man whose net worth was a headline. His assistant, a perpetually nervous young man named Peterson, would handle the logistics. The boxes would be sent to a storage unit, their contents likely never to be seen by Arthur again. He was already scrolling through market projections on his phone when the auctioneer moved to the next item. But as the applause, thin and polite, spattered around him, a child's voice, impossibly clear in the cavernous room, seemed to whisper directly into his ear, "Find me, Artie." He froze, his thumb hovering over a stock ticker. No one had called him Artie in 25 years. No one living, anyway. He dismissed it as a phantom of stress, a ghost rattling the chains of a 12-hour workday. Yet, when Peterson confirmed the acquisition, a strange compulsion made Arthur utter words he hadn't planned. "Have one of the hat boxes sent to my penthouse, the small blue one. I want to see it tonight." Peterson blinked, startled by the deviation from protocol, but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Penhaligon." Later that night, in the sterile silence of his glass-walled apartment, overlooking a city that glittered like a spilled jewelry box, Arthur pried open the lid of the faded, robin's egg blue box. It smelled of lavender and mothballs. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed lace gloves and a string of faux pearls, was a small, worn diary, its pink cover adorned with a cartoon unicorn. It was the sort of book a child would cherish. He almost closed the lid, annoyed at his own morbid curiosity. What was he doing? But the phantom whisper returned, a faint echo in his memory. With a sigh of resignation, he opened the diary to a random page. The handwriting was a child's looping, earnest scrawl, written in purple ink. The entry was dated just 6 months ago. "Mommy told me about Daddy again tonight. She said he was like a prince who lost his kingdom, but that he was building a new one, bigger and brighter than any castle. She said his name was Arthur, but she always called him Artie. She said he had stars in his eyes. I hope he finds us soon. Mommy's cough is getting worse." Arthur dropped the book as if it had burned him. The air rushed from his lungs, the city lights blurred into a meaningless smear. He stumbled back, his hand pressed against the cold glass of the window. His own reflection, a pale, hollow-eyed stranger. Stars in his eyes. It was what she used to say, her voice a soft murmur, in the dark of their tiny rented room, a lifetime ago. Eleanor. It couldn't be. A coincidence. A cruel, meaningless prank of the universe. He snatched the diary from the plush carpet, his hands trembling, and flipped to the first page. Written on the line, "This diary belongs to," was a single name that shattered his world into a million pieces: Lily Penhaligon. The name echoed in the vast, silent space of his life, a name he had never heard, but which felt like a piece of his own soul had been torn out and handed to him. Penhaligon. It wasn't a common name. He sank into a low, leather armchair that cost more than the car he and Eleanor had once dreamed of owning, the diary held loosely in his hands. It felt both alien and profoundly familiar. He was a man who dealt in facts, in figures, in tangible assets, and predictable outcomes. His life was a fortress of order, built to keep out the chaos of his past. And this small, unicorn-clad book was a wrecking ball. He forced himself to be rational. It had to be a mistake. Some other Penhaligon. But the nickname, Artie, and the phrase, stars in his eyes, that was theirs. A secret language from a life he had buried under years of relentless ambition. He remembered the night she'd first said it. They were lying on a blanket in a scrappy patch of City Park, the only green space they could afford. He was tracing constellations for her, telling her how he was going to conquer the world, not with armies, but with ideas. He was full of fire and fury then, a boy from the gutter determined to claw his way to the top. She had touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin, and whispered it. "You have stars in your eyes, Artie." It was a promise and a prophecy. He had conquered the world. He had built his kingdom of steel and glass. But he had lost his queen. He had left her. That was the fact he could never escape. The truth that no amount of wealth could rewrite. He'd woken up one morning in their cramped apartment, the smell of burnt toast from the downstairs neighbor in the air, the sound of sirens in the distance, and the weight of his own failure crushing him. He was 22, brilliant, and dirt poor. He looked at Eleanor sleeping, her face so full of trust, and felt a toxic surge of shame. He couldn't give her anything. He was a lead weight tied to her ankles, dragging her down into his own poverty. So he had packed a bag, stolen the last $40 from the chipped cookie jar they kept on the fridge, and vanished. No note, no goodbye. It was the cruelest and kindest thing he could do, he'd told himself. He was setting her free. He'd promised himself he would come back for her, once he had something to offer, once he was worthy. But years turned into a decade, and the kingdom he built required all of his attention. The shame of how he'd left curdled into a wall of pride. How could he go back now? A titan of industry crawling back to the woman he'd abandoned. The story he told himself was that she would have moved on, found someone better, someone who hadn't left her to face the world alone. It was easier to believe that than to confront the magnitude of his own cowardice. Now, this diary, this Lily, Penhaligon, could it be his? The thought was an electric shock. A child, his child. He felt a wave of nausea. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the childish script, looking for more clues, for anything to confirm or deny the impossible. The entries were a tapestry of a life he couldn't imagine. Today was a good day. Mommy didn't have to work late, so we made a pillow fort and read stories with a flashlight. She did the monster voice, and it was so funny I got hiccups. Another entry. Mrs. Gable next door gave us a bag of lemons. We made lemonade and sold it on the sidewalk. We made $7. Mommy said, "We are brilliant entrepreneurs." I used my half to buy her a new scarf because hers has a hole in it. It's yellow, her favorite color. The stark simplicity of their life, the joy squeezed from so little, was a physical blow. He looked around his penthouse. Original artwork on the walls, furniture imported from Milan, a kitchen he hadn't cooked a meal in for years. He had everything, and he had nothing. This little girl, this Lily, had pillow forts and sidewalk lemonade stands, and she sounded richer than he could ever be. He found another entry that made his blood run cold. We had to move again. The new place is smaller, and the window looks at a brick wall. Mommy says it's a castle for a secret princess, and the brick wall is to keep the dragons out. but I heard her crying last night when she thought I was asleep. I pretended to snore so she wouldn't know. I wish Daddy would find us. I bet he would slay all the dragons." The dragons! He knew about the dragons. He had spent his entire life running from them. Eviction notices, empty cupboards, the gnawing fear of not being able to make rent. He had built his empire as a fortress against those very dragons, and in doing so he had left Eleanor and his daughter to fight them alone. Guilt was a foreign emotion to Arthur Penhaligon. He operated in a world of calculated risks and strategic advantages, not regret. But now it was a physical presence in the room, a suffocating weight on his chest. He read on, the hours ticking by, the city lights outside dimming as the world went to sleep. He pieced together their life from Lily's innocent observations. Eleanor worked multiple jobs, a waitress, a cleaner, something at a library that Lily loved because she could do her homework there. They moved frequently, always one step ahead of a rent increase or a new landlord. There were mentions of doctor's visits, of Mommy being tired, of the persistent cough that Lily chronicled with a child's unwavering concern. The diary was a testament to Eleanor's strength, to her ability to shield her daughter from the harsh realities of their poverty, turning every hardship into a game, every setback into an adventure. She was still the same Eleanor, he remembered, fierce, imaginative, and endlessly resilient. But woven through the cheerful accounts of pillow forts and library trips was a thread of deep, abiding sadness. The father Lily wrote about was a myth, a fairy tale prince. Eleanor had constructed a hero for her daughter out of the ghost of the boy who had abandoned them. Lily wrote to him in the diary as if he were a real person who would one day read her words. "Dear Daddy, I hope you're having a good day building your kingdom. I learned about photosynthesis in school today. It's how plants eat sunlight. Isn't that amazing? I wish I could eat sunlight. Mommy says I already do, that my smile is powered by the sun. I love you. Please come home soon. Love, Lily." Arthur had to stop. He closed the diary and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. The words blurred, and he felt a strange, unfamiliar prickling sensation. It took him a moment to identify it as the precursor to tears. He hadn't cried since he was a boy, since the day his own father had walked out, leaving him with a bitter, silent mother and a legacy of failure he'd sworn to overcome. He had become his father. The thought was a dagger in his heart. He, who despised the man for his weakness, had repeated the same sin. He had run away. He stood and paced the length of his apartment, the thick rug silencing his footsteps. The silence was usually a comfort, a shield. Tonight it was an accusation. Every gleaming surface, every expensive object, seemed to mock him. He had filled his life with things, but his life was empty. He had built a kingdom, but he had no one to share it with. He had no heir. Or did he? He had to know. The uncertainty was unbearable. He picked up his phone, his first instinct, to call his private investigator, a ruthless man who could find anyone, anywhere. But he stopped. This was not a business transaction. This was something else. Something fragile. To send a stranger into their lives felt like a violation. He couldn't risk frightening them, couldn't risk them disappearing again before he had a chance to understand. He had to do this himself. But where would he even begin? The diary offered few clues. No addresses, no last names for friends or neighbors, just the intimate geography of a little girl's world. The park with the big slide, the library with the sleepy cat, Mrs. Gable's apartment that always smells like cinnamon. It was a map drawn with emotions, not street names. The auction house, that was the first step. The lot had come from an estate sale. Someone had died, and their possessions had been sold off. The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through him. What if it was Eleanor's estate? What if he was too late? He looked at the date of the last entry in the diary. It was only 3 weeks ago. Mommy is in the hospital. The doctor said her heart is tired. I'm staying with Mrs. Gable. She smells like cinnamon, but she's not Mommy. I'm scared. Please find us, Daddy. Please. 3 weeks. Anything could have happened in 3 weeks. Arthur's mind, usually a precise instrument of logic and strategy, was now a maelstrom of fear. His heart, an organ he generally ignored, was pounding against his ribs. He felt an urgency he hadn't experienced since the early days of his company, when a single deal could make or break him. This was bigger. This was everything. He strode into his home office, a sleek, minimalist space where he had orchestrated billion-dollar mergers, and felt utterly powerless. He sat at his desk, the diary open before him. He needed a plan. The auction house records would lead him to the estate lawyer, who would lead him to the address. It was a simple chain of information. He could have the answer in hours. He pulled up the auction house's website, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He found the contact information for the estates department. It was 3 a.m. He would have to wait. Waiting was another thing Arthur Penhaligon did not do well. The intervening hours stretched before him like a desert. Sleep was impossible. He went back to the living room and picked up the diary again, handling it with a reverence he normally reserved for priceless artifacts. He started from the beginning, reading every word Lily had written. He immersed himself in her world. He learned her favorite color was purple, that she was afraid of spiders but loved thunderstorms, that she dreamed of having a dog she would name Stardust. He learned that her mother, Eleanor, sang her to sleep every night, the same lullaby her own mother used to sing to her. A lullaby he remembered. He saw his lost love through his daughter's eyes. He saw her courage, her laughter, her quiet moments of despair. And he saw himself, a phantom father, a mythical hero. A lie. A beautiful, heartbreaking lie that Eleanor had spun to protect her child from the ugly truth her father had abandoned them. By the time the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gray, Arthur had a clear, unshakable conviction. He was not the hero in Lily's diary. He was the dragon, and he had to be slain. But first, he had to find them. At precisely 9 a.m. he called the auction house. His voice was calm, authoritative, the voice he used to command boardrooms. He was Mr. Penhaligon, inquiring about Lot 7B. He explained he was so taken with the quality of the items that he wished to contact the original owners, or their estate, to see if more pieces were available. It was a thin pretext, but money had a way of making pretexts plausible. The clerk, suitably impressed by his name, promised to have the information for him within the hour. The hour felt like a lifetime. Arthur paced, unable to focus on the market reports Peterson had emailed him. The numbers, usually a source of comfort and control, were meaningless. The only thing that mattered was a name and an address. When the phone finally rang, he snatched it up. The clerk gave him the name of a probate lawyer. Arthur thanked him and immediately dialed the lawyer's number. He used the same story. This time, he added that he was a collector of vintage Americana, and he was prepared to pay a significant sum for any other items from the same collection. Greed, he knew, was a powerful motivator. The lawyer, after a calculated pause, agreed to contact the executor of the estate and pass along his request. He would call back, more waiting. Arthur felt like a caged animal. He went to his floor-to-ceiling window and stared down at the city. He had always seen it as his kingdom. Now he saw it as a labyrinth. Somewhere in that sprawling metropolis of millions, a little girl was waiting for a hero who didn't exist. Somewhere, Eleanor was... what? In a hospital? The thought was a physical pain. He pictured her, not as the vibrant girl he remembered, but as a pale, weary woman in a sterile bed. What had their life done to her? What had he done to her? He had given her nothing but a struggle, a burden, a child to raise alone. The lawyer called back 2 hours later. He had spoken to the executor. The estate was that of an elderly woman, a Mrs. Eleanor Gable. She had passed away 3 weeks ago. Arthur's heart stopped. Eleanor Gable, not Penhaligon. Then the name registered. Mrs. Gable next door. She smells like cinnamon. It was the neighbor. Not his Eleanor. The relief was so profound, so dizzying, that he had to sit down. The lawyer continued, oblivious to the drama playing out on the other end of the line. Mrs. Gable had no living relatives. Her next-door neighbors, a single mother and her young daughter, had looked after her in her final months. In her will, Mrs. Gable had left her meager possessions to them. But, the lawyer said with a sigh, the mother and daughter had disappeared. They had moved out of their apartment the day after Mrs. Gable's death, leaving no forwarding address. The landlord, owed back rent, had claimed their abandoned property, which wasn't much, and sent Mrs. Gable's things to auction to recoup some of his losses. Disappeared. The word was a punch to the gut. He was so close, and yet they were gone. The address, Arthur said, his voice tight. What was their address? The lawyer gave it to him. It was in a part of the city he hadn't set foot in for 25 years. The neighborhood he had grown up in. The place he had run from. Of course. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of poetry. He didn't bother with his driver. He drove himself, taking one of the sleek, anonymous luxury sedans from his private garage. The car felt absurdly out of place as he navigated the increasingly narrow, potholed streets of his old neighborhood. The gleaming high-rises gave way to squat, brick tenement buildings, their fire escapes zigzagging down the facades like iron scars. He parked in front of a building that looked just like the one he'd grown up in, a place haunted by the ghosts of poverty and despair. He got out of the car, his expensive suit feeling like a costume. The air smelled different here, a mixture of exhaust fumes, damp pavement, and the faint, greasy aroma of a nearby takeaway. He walked up the crumbling concrete steps and into the dimly lit vestibule. The building's directory was a mess of faded handwritten names. He found what he was looking for. Apt 4B, E. Vance. 4C, Gable, E. Vance. Eleanor's mother's maiden name. She had gone back to it. A small act of erasure. She had wiped him from her life, at least on paper. He climbed the creaking stairs to the 4th floor. The hallway was narrow and smelled of boiled cabbage and disinfectant. He found apartment 4B. The door was scarred with old paint, a cheap, flimsy thing. He could hear a television blaring from inside. A new tenant. They were truly gone. He knocked on the door of 4C, Mrs. Gable's apartment. No answer. Of course not. He stood in the hallway, a ghost in his own past, feeling the walls closing in. What now? He had hit a dead end. He could hire his investigator, blanket the city with queries, use his limitless resources to track them down. But it still felt wrong. He needed to follow the trail himself, to walk the path they had walked. He went back to the diary, his only guide. He read it again, this time looking for landmarks, for routines. The library with the sleepy cat, the park with the big slide. Mr. Henderson's corner store, where he gives me a free lollipop if I can spell chrysanthemum. It was a long shot. A desperate, foolish plan. But it was all he had. He would retrace their steps. He would walk through Lily's world, and maybe, just maybe, he would find her. He started with the corner store. He drove around the neighborhood for 15 minutes before he found it. A small, unassuming place with a faded green awning. Henderson's Groceries. He walked in. An old man with a kind, wrinkled face looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" he asked. Arthur felt a surge of awkwardness. What was he supposed to say? "I'm looking for a woman and a little girl who might be my family that I abandoned a quarter of a century ago." He cleared his throat. "I'm looking for a family that used to live around here," he said, his voice sounding stiff and formal. "A woman named Eleanor Vance and her daughter, Lily." Mr. Henderson's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, Ellie and little Lily Pad? Of course I know them. Sweetest girl you'd ever meet. Smart as a whip, too. Could spell chrysanthemum since she was 6. He chuckled. "They haven't been around for a few weeks, though. They moved out after poor old Mrs. Gable passed. A real shame." "You don't know where they went, do you?" Arthur asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. The old man shook his head slowly. "No idea. Ellie was a private person. Proud. Never asked for help, even when I knew she needed it. I hope they're all right. That little girl was a ray of sunshine in this place." He paused, looking at Arthur more closely. "You a relative?" The question hung in the air. Arthur, the man who could command markets and bend boards of directors to his will, was speechless. What was he? He was a ghost, a myth, a failure. "Something like that," he mumbled. He bought a bottle of water he didn't need and left, the old man's kind eyes following him out the door. Next, the park. He found it 3 blocks away. It was a small, sad patch of green, bordered by a chain-link fence. There was a rusted swing set, a sandbox with more weeds than sand, and a single, large metal slide, its surface worn smooth by generations of children. He could picture Lily here. He could see her climbing the ladder, her face bright with excitement, then sliding down with a squeal of delight. He could see Eleanor watching her, a tired but loving smile on her face. He sat on a graffiti-covered bench, the same bench where he and Eleanor had probably sat all those years ago. Had she brought their daughter here on purpose? A pilgrimage to a place that once held a happy memory? Or was it just the closest park? He didn't know. He was a stranger in his own story. He stayed for an hour, watching mothers push their children on the swings, listening to the familiar sounds of a city playground. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a movie of a life he should have had. No one noticed the man in the expensive suit, sitting alone on a park bench, his face a mask of grief. The library was his last hope for the day. He remembered a small, branch library from his childhood, a quiet sanctuary from the noise of the streets. He found it, a squat brick building tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. He walked in, the scent of old paper and floor wax instantly transporting him back in time. He saw a large orange cat sleeping on a shelf of biographies. The library with the sleepy cat. This was the place. A woman at the front desk looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" she asked. He repeated his query, the words feeling a little less foreign now. "I'm looking for Eleanor Vance and her daughter, Lily." The librarian's expression softened. "Oh, Lily, we miss her. She was one of our regulars. She'd come in every day after school and sit in that corner over there," she said, pointing to a small table and chairs in the children's section. "She would do her homework and read until her mother came to pick her up after her shift." "Her shift?" Arthur asked. "Eleanor worked here, part-time," the librarian explained. "Reshelving books, mostly. She was a wonderful worker, very dedicated. We were all so sorry when she had to leave." "Why did she leave?" The librarian hesitated, lowering her voice. "Her health wasn't good. She had a bad cough for months, kept getting worse. She was trying to power through it, for Lily's sake. But about a month ago, she collapsed. Right here. An ambulance had to come. It was her heart, I think. We haven't seen them since." The world tilted on its axis. "Mommy is in the hospital. The doctor said her heart is tired." Lily's words from the diary. It was real. All of it. Eleanor had collapsed. A month ago. Just before Mrs. Gable died. Just before they disappeared. "Which hospital?" Arthur demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. The librarian looked startled. I think it was St. Jude's, General. It's the closest one to here." St. Jude's. He knew it. It was an underfunded, overcrowded public hospital. Not the kind of place where you got the best care. Not the kind of place a man with his resources would ever set foot in. But Eleanor wasn't a woman with resources. She was a woman he had left with nothing. He thanked the librarian and ran from the building, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He drove to St. Jude's, breaking every speed limit, his mind racing. Was she still there? Had she been discharged? Was she... He couldn't let himself think it. He abandoned his car in a loading zone and strode into the chaotic emergency room, a man on a mission. The place was a maelstrom of human suffering. He ignored the stares his suit attracted and marched to the admissions desk. "I need information on a patient," he said to the harried-looking nurse. "Eleanor Vance." The nurse typed the name into her computer, her expression weary. "She was discharged 3 weeks ago." "Discharged!" The relief was quickly replaced by confusion. "Discharged to where?" "It just says home, but she doesn't have a home. She lost her apartment," he said, frustration boiling over. The nurse gave him a look of tired sympathy. "Sir, I can't give you any more information. HIPAA regulations." He was about to argue, to use his name, his power, to demand answers. But then he looked around at the exhausted staff, at the people waiting patiently for care, at the raw, unfiltered reality of a world he had long since insulated himself from. Who was he to make demands here? He was part of the problem. He was a man who could buy a hospital, yet he had left the woman he loved and their child to the mercy of this overburdened system. The shame was a physical taste in his mouth, bitter and acidic. He stepped away from the desk, defeated. He was back to square one. They were out there, somewhere in the city, and he had no idea where. Eleanor, with a weak heart, and Lily, a little girl who was scared. He walked out of the hospital and back to his car. The city seemed vast and indifferent. He felt small, insignificant. All his money, all his power, and he couldn't find them. He sat in his car, the engine off, and for the first time in his adult life, Arthur Penhaligon felt completely and utterly lost. He picked up the diary from the passenger seat. It was his only compass. He had to think like Lily. He had to see the world through her eyes. Where would they go? Somewhere safe. Somewhere cheap. Eleanor was proud, Mr. Henderson had said. She wouldn't go to a shelter, not if she could help it. She would find a place on her own. A weekly rate motel? A room in a boarding house? He started driving, aimlessly at first, then with a dawning purpose. He drove through the city's forgotten neighborhoods, the ones that didn't appear in glossy travel magazines. He looked for the transient hotels, the places with faded peeling paint and flickering vacancy signs. He spent the next 2 days in a blur of motion, a ghost haunting the fringes of his own city. He showed their picture, a photograph of Eleanor he'd kept hidden in a box, from a time when her eyes were bright and full of hope for their future, and a mental image of Lily he'd constructed from her diary, to night clerks and hotel managers. He was met with suspicion, with indifference, with shakes of the head. No one had seen them. He was losing hope. He was exhausted, running on caffeine and desperation. He was about to give up for the night when he saw it. A small residential hotel called the Bluebell Inn. It was cleaner than the others, with pots of geraniums on the front steps. It looked like a place someone like Eleanor might choose, a place that offered a small measure of dignity in a desperate situation. He walked in. The lobby was small and tidy. A woman with gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes sat behind the desk. He gave her his now-practiced speech, showing her the old photograph. "I'm looking for this woman. Her name is Eleanor. She has a daughter, about 7 years old, named Lily." The woman looked at the photograph, then back at him. Her gaze was unnervingly direct. "And who are you?" she asked. Not, "I haven't seen them," but "who are you?" It was a direct challenge. Arthur hesitated. The lie about being a relative felt thin and shabby now. He owed this story. He owed them the truth. "My name is Arthur Penhaligon," he said, his voice quiet. I believe I'm Lily's father." The woman's expression didn't change. She simply stared at him for a long moment, her eyes seeming to search for something deep inside him. He felt stripped bare, his wealth and power irrelevant. He was just a man, full of regret, looking for his family. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "They were here," she said. "Room 207. They left this morning." His heart sank. He had missed them again. Where did they go? She didn't say. She paid her bill in cash and they left. The little girl, she was crying. The woman's voice softened with sympathy. "Eleanor didn't look well. She looked like she was at the end of her rope." Arthur felt a fresh wave of panic. "Did they leave anything behind? Anything at all?" The woman thought for a moment. "Just some trash. I haven't had the room cleaned yet." "Can I see it?" he asked, the words tumbling out. "Please, it's important." The woman looked at him again, a long, assessing gaze. Then she reached under the counter and pulled out a key. "Room 207, she said, handing it to him. "Don't make a mess." He took the key, his hand shaking. "Thank you," he whispered. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding. He fumbled with the key, his fingers clumsy, and finally got the door open. The room was small and sparse. A bed, a small table, a threadbare armchair. It was clean, but it felt sad, empty. A small metal wastebasket stood in the corner. He knelt and gently tipped its contents onto the floor. Old tissues, a wrapper from a granola bar, a receipt from a pharmacy, and underneath it all, a crumpled piece of paper. He carefully smoothed it out. It was a drawing, done in purple crayon. A stick figure of a man with a crown, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands in front of a giant castle. And at the bottom, in Lily's familiar looping script, were 3 words: Daddy, find us. And next to the drawing, an address. Not a street address, but a name. Starlight Sanctuary. He didn't know what Starlight Sanctuary was, but his phone did. It was a long-term shelter for families, located on the far side of the city, a place for people who had run out of options. Eleanor had swallowed her pride. She had taken her daughter to a shelter because she had nowhere else to go. He had done this to them. The drive to the shelter was the longest of his life. He was no longer just a man searching for a lost love. He was a father searching for his child. He was a king who had abandoned his kingdom, now returning to find it in ruins. He didn't know what he would say, what he could possibly do to fix the damage he had caused. But he knew he had to try. The shelter was a large, imposing brick building, a former convent. It looked more like a prison than a sanctuary. He parked his car and walked to the entrance, his steps heavy. He felt the weight of 25 years of silence, of neglect, of cowardice. He walked through the doors and into a large, noisy reception area. A woman sat behind a pane of thick, protective glass. Arthur approached the window. "I'm here to see Eleanor Vance and her daughter Lily," he said. The woman looked at him, her face impassive. "And you are?" "I'm her. I'm Arthur." The woman picked up a phone. "Eleanor, there's an Arthur here to see you." She listened for a moment, then hung up. "She'll be right down." He waited, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He felt more nervous than he had before the most important meeting of his life. Then he saw her. She came down a flight of stairs at the far end of the room. She was thinner than he remembered, her face pale and etched with worry. But it was her, his Eleanor. Her hair was still the same warm brown, her eyes still the same deep, soulful gray. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes widening as she recognized him. The noisy room seemed to fade into silence. It was just the two of them, suspended in a moment of impossible reunion. She didn't speak. She just stared at him, a quarter-century of questions in her eyes. And behind her, peeking out from behind her legs, was a small girl with big, curious gray eyes and familiar brown hair. She was clutching a worn pink diary with a unicorn on the cover. Lily, his daughter. She looked just like him. Arthur's carefully constructed world dissolved. The ruthless businessman, the titan of industry, vanished. In his place was just Artie, the boy with stars in his eyes, who had run away and had finally come home. He took a tentative step forward, his lips forming her name, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in decades, but had whispered to himself in his darkest hours. "Eleanor." Her face crumpled. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, a ghost from his past made real. And the little girl, Lily, stepped out from behind her mother. She looked at him, her head tilted, her expression not fearful, but intensely curious. She was studying him, comparing him to the myth her mother had created. "Are you him?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "Are you the prince?" Arthur's throat was tight. He couldn't speak. He could only nod, a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to bring him to his knees. He looked from Lily's hopeful, questioning face to Eleanor's, which was a storm of conflicting emotions, shock, pain, anger, and something else he couldn't dare to name. Hope? He had no right to hope. He had forfeited that right when he stole $40 from a cookie jar and walked out of her life. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" Eleanor finally said, her voice raspy, unfamiliar. It was the voice of a woman who had fought too many battles alone. He began, but the words failed him. "I'm sorry," was a pathetic, inadequate phrase. "I made a mistake," was a cosmic understatement. "I came back for you," was 25 years too late. He held up the crumpled drawing Lily had left in the motel room. "I found this," he said simply. "I came to find you." Eleanor's eyes flickered to the drawing, then back to his face. The anger in her expression seemed to solidify. "You came to find us? It took you long enough. Where have you been, Arthur? Where have you been while I was working 3 jobs to keep a roof over our head? Where were you when she was sick? Where were you when I collapsed in the library? When my heart gave out because I was so damn tired of fighting alone?" Each question was a blow. He deserved every one. He didn't flinch. He just stood there and took it. "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have no excuse. There is no excuse. I was a coward." Lily looked back and forth between them, her small face clouded with confusion. "Mommy," she said, tugging on Eleanor's hand. "It's him. It's Daddy." Eleanor looked down at her daughter, and her hard expression softened into one of infinite sadness. She ran a hand over Lily's hair. "I know, baby. I know." She looked back at Arthur, and the anger was gone, replaced by a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. "Why now, Arthur? After all this time? Why show up now?" He took another step closer, his hands open at his sides, in a gesture of surrender. "Because I was a fool. I spent my whole life building a kingdom of things, and I didn't realize until I found her diary that I had left my only treasure behind." He gestured toward Lily. "I didn't know about her, Eleanor. I swear, I didn't know." The admission hung in the air between them. He could see her processing it, the truth of his words warring with the years of hurt. "You left," she said, her voice breaking. "You just left. I woke up and you were gone. Do you have any idea what that was like? I thought something had happened to you. I searched for you for weeks. I called hospitals, police stations, and then I realized you had just left me." "I was ashamed," he said, the confession feeling like tearing open an old wound. "I was poor. I had nothing to give you. I thought I was holding you back. I told myself I was setting you free. I was going to make something of myself, and then I was going to come back. But I got lost." "Lost," she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You didn't get lost, Arthur. I've seen your name in the paper. I've seen your face on magazine covers. You're Arthur Penhaligon. You're not lost. You're a success. You just forgot where you came from. You forgot who you came from." He had no defense against her words, because they were true. He had let his ambition become a monster that consumed his past. He looked at Lily, who was watching them with wide, intelligent eyes, absorbing everything. He knelt, so he was on her level. "Hello, Lily," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "My name is Arthur, but a long time ago your mom used to call me Artie." Lily's face broke into a tentative smile. "I know," she said. "She told me. She said you have stars in your eyes. She stepped closer, her initial shyness gone, replaced by a child's simple, uncomplicated acceptance. She reached out a small hand and gently touched his cheek. "You look sad," she said. Her touch was like a brand. It was the first time in years he had felt a human touch that wasn't a formal handshake or a fleeting, meaningless social gesture. It was a touch that connected him to something real, something vital. It connected him to her, to them, to the life he had thrown away. He closed his eyes, and a single tear, the one he had been holding back for a quarter of a century, finally fell. He didn't bother to wipe it away. He let Lily see it. He let Eleanor see it. He let them see the truth of him, not the powerful billionaire, but the broken man who had lost his way. "I am sad," he whispered. "I'm sad for all the time I missed. I'm sad for everything I put your mother through. And I am so sorry." He opened his eyes and looked at Eleanor, pleading with her, trying to convey the depth of his regret with a single look. "Let me help, Eleanor. Please, let me fix this." "Fix this?" she repeated, the anger flaring again. "You can't fix this with money, Arthur. You can't just walk back in here and buy us a happy ending. This isn't one of your business deals." "I know," he said, standing up to face her. "I know it's not that simple. It's not about the money. It's about me. I want to be here. I want to be a father to my daughter. I want a chance to earn your forgiveness, if you'll let me." He stood before her, stripped of all his power and prestige. He was a supplicant, begging for a mercy he knew he didn't deserve. The next move was hers. The future of 3 lives rested on her decision. She looked at him, at the genuine remorse in his eyes, at the tear track on his face. She looked at Lily, who was now standing beside him, her hand having slipped trustingly into his. Her daughter, who had dreamed of this moment, who had written to a phantom father in her diary, was looking up at him with adoration. How could she deny her that? How could she let her own justifiable anger poison her daughter's happiness? With a long, shuddering sigh, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was a start. It was a door, cracked open just enough for a little bit of light to get in. The days that followed were a delicate, complicated dance. Arthur didn't try to sweep in and solve all their problems with a wave of his gold card. He knew, instinctively, that would be the wrong move. It would feel like a transaction, and this was about connection. He started small. He got them out of the shelter and into a comfortable, furnished apartment in a quiet, safe neighborhood. Not a penthouse, just a nice, normal home with a sunny spare bedroom for Lily and a small balcony where Eleanor could grow flowers. He didn't just have it arranged, he was there. He helped them move their few belongings. He awkwardly tried to assemble a bookshelf for Lily's room, fumbling with the instructions until Eleanor, with a small, reluctant smile, took over and put it together in 10 minutes. It was the first time he'd seen her smile at him, and it was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. He learned to be present. He canceled meetings. He ignored his phone. He delegated the running of his empire to his stunned subordinates. His new job was learning how to be a father. He took Lily to the park, a much nicer park, with a brand new slide. He pushed her on the swings, higher and higher, her laughter echoing in the clear afternoon air. He took her to the library, where she proudly introduced him to the librarian and the sleepy cat. He helped her with her homework, marveling at her quick, inquisitive mind. He read her stories at night, his voice, accustomed to commanding boardrooms, softening as he did the monster voices, just as she'd described in her diary. With Eleanor, it was more difficult. There were years of silence and pain between them, a chasm that couldn't be crossed in a few days. They talked, mostly late at night, after Lily was asleep. He let her be angry. He listened as she told him about the lonely years, the struggles, the fear. He didn't make excuses. He just listened, and he apologized. He apologized for his cowardice, for his selfishness, for his silence. He told her about his own empty life, about the hollowness of his success. He showed her the man behind the myth, the scared boy who was still hiding inside the powerful billionaire. Slowly, cautiously, the walls between them began to come down. She started to talk about the good times, the memories they had shared before he left. She reminded him of dreams they'd had, of jokes they'd shared. She started to call him Artie again, tentatively at first, then with more familiarity. He took care of her. He found the best cardiologist in the city and went with her to every appointment. The diagnosis was serious, a congenital heart condition, exacerbated by years of stress and untreated illness. It would require surgery. She was terrified, but he was there. He held her hand in the waiting room. He sat by her bedside after the operation. He was there when she woke up, his face the first thing she saw. And in her tired, pain-filled eyes, he saw a flicker of the old love, the love he thought he had lost forever. The day she came home from the hospital was a turning point. Lily had decorated the apartment with "Welcome Home" mommy banners and drawings of smiling sons. Arthur had cooked dinner, a simple pasta dish, the only thing he knew how to make. It wasn't very good, but they ate it together, the three of them, at the small kitchen table. And for the first time, they felt like a family. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. It was messy and complicated and full of mistakes, but it was theirs. Arthur learned that true wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios or real estate holdings. It was measured in shared laughter, in bedtime stories, in the quiet comfort of knowing you belong to someone. He didn't slay any dragons. He learned that the dragons weren't the poverty or the struggle. The biggest dragon had been his own fear, his own pride. By finally facing it, by having the courage to be vulnerable, he had found his way home. One evening, months later, he was sitting with Lily on the balcony, looking up at the night sky. He was pointing out the constellations, just as he had done for her mother a lifetime ago. Lily was nestled beside him, her head on his shoulder. "Daddy?" she said, her voice sleepy. "Yes, lily pad." "You don't have stars in your eyes anymore," she said. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. He looked over at Eleanor, who was watching them from the doorway, her face full of a quiet, peaceful love. "No," he said, pulling his daughter closer. "I don't need them anymore. I have them right here." He had finally found his kingdom, and it was bigger and brighter than any castle. It was a small apartment with a balcony full of flowers, and it was filled with love. It was everything. It was home,